Imagine standing on an Olympic starting line. Millions of people are watching, the cameras are flashing, and the weight of your entire country's expectations is resting squarely on your shoulders.
Oh, yeah. That is a terrifying amount of pressure.
Right. Now, wipe that image completely. Instead, imagine sitting in a boarding school dorm room at 2 in the morning. You're staring at an open textbook. The words are just blurring together, and you are entirely convinced you're the only fraud in the building who doesn't understand the material.
Which is such a universal feeling. And neurologically speaking, your brain is actually experiencing the exact same crisis.
Wait, really? The exact same?
Yeah, it's a fascinating biological reality, that physiological panic, the racing heart, the tunnel vision, the shallow breathing. It doesn't care if you're racing for gold or, just trying to pass A-level chemistry. Your sympathetic nervous system is firing the exact same alarm bells.
That is wild. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. Today we're looking at a really compelling source document titled, What a Boarder Can Learn from Dame Kelly Holmes.
And it is a brilliant read.
It really is. But hey, if you think this is just going to be some, quaint survival guide for teenagers wearing blazers, definitely stick around. We are tearing into the underlying mechanics of resilience, mental health, and how to operate when you are practically drowning in self-doubt.
Because the truth is, whether you are stepping up to a podium, presenting some make-or-break pitch to a hostile boardroom, or just trying to navigate a brutally demanding environment in your own life, the architecture of human performance is identical.
Spot on.
We really want to break down why certain psychological strategies work across the board in literally any high-pressure crucible.
So let's jump right into the deepest end of the pool here, because
Yeah.
before we can talk about achieving massive success, we have to look honestly at what it actually feels like when you're struggling.
Right. We have to demystify the struggle first.
Exactly. The analysis anchors its whole psychological framework on Dame Kelly Holmes. And it deliberately points out that before she became this legendary double Olympic gold medalist, her journey was completely paved with severe injuries, crippling anxiety, and, well, long, dark periods of incredibly low confidence.
Which is such a vital reality check, for anyone.
Yeah, it really is.
Because we have this pervasive cultural assumption, especially in competitive academic or corporate environments, that successful people just, woke up that way. We assume they have some biological advantage of unwavering self-belief.
Okay, let's unpack this. I really want to push back on that conventional wisdom for a second.
for it.
Because if you look at the messaging we get, isn't elite confidence practically a prerequisite to even step onto an Olympic track? Or to succeed at a top-tier boarding school?
That's certainly what we're told, yeah.
Right. We treat confidence like a ZIP pass. You need to show it to the bouncer before you enter the room, rather than viewing it as a souvenir you might pick up on the way out.
Yeah.
We think, if we don't feel entirely secure right from the start, we must be in the wrong place.
What's fascinating here is, I'd argue it's even more fundamental than that. We mistake the presence of doubt for the absence of ability.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
But the framework we're analyzing today flips that completely. It argues that uncertainty is actually a core mechanism of growth. It is not a symptom of failure. Recognizing that these feelings of imposter syndrome are deeply, profoundly normal is what actually changes the game.
Because it stops the shame spiral.
Right.
You aren't panicking about the fact that you're panicking.
Precisely. Let's look at how this manifests in a boarding school environment, just as an example. You have students worrying constantly about their academic performance. They're constantly comparing themselves to their peers.
Oh, the comparison trap is huge.
It's massive. They feel totally unsure about their friendships, their sense of belonging, and they question their own abilities the second they face even a minor setback.
And let's be honest about what a boarding house actually is.
Yeah.
It can be a toxic arms race of performative stress.
Oh, absolutely.
You know the conversations. One student says, I only got 4 hours of sleep studying for this exam. And another immediately counters with, well, I only got 3.
Right, like it's some sort of badge of honor.
Exactly. When you live away from home, surrounded by peers who are all projecting this image that they have it completely together, that internal doubt feels incredibly isolating.
And that isolation is the actual danger. It's what makes the pressure unmanageable. If you believe you are the only one struggling to keep your head above water, the cognitive weight of that secret is just crushing.
It takes up so much mental bandwidth.
Yes, it drains the energy you need to actually learn. But by normalizing self-doubt, by looking at someone like an Olympic gold medalist and realizing, wow, she felt the exact same nausea and low confidence that actively neutralizes the panic. You realize you aren't a fraud. You are simply a human being adapting to a highly challenging environment.
Which is a massive paradigm shift. You don't have to eradicate doubt to succeed. You just have to realize it's a passenger in the car, not the driver.
I love that analogy.
Thanks. But that brings us to a mechanical problem. Once we strip away the shame of self-doubt, you still have to pass the test. You still have to run the race. So how do we actually keep moving forward when the pressure is on?
Well, this is where we transition from the abstract feeling of doubt to the biological mechanics of maintaining the mind.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the analysis points out a fatal flaw in how students and honestly how most professionals operate. We hyper-focus on the output.
We do. We obsess over it.
We grind away at the academic goals, we stare at the screens, we pull the all-nighters, but we completely overlook the emotional and physical well-being required to actually sustain that output.
Right. We treat well-being as a luxury, like it's a reward we might allow ourselves only after the work is done, rather than recognizing it as the biological foundation of the performance itself.
I always think of this like trying to tune a race car. You can't just keep stomping on the gas, hyper-focusing on your achievements without ever checking the oil or letting the engine cool down with rest and recovery. Eventually, the engine just blows.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it, biologically speaking. Because high-stress environments trigger the release of cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Exactly. In short bursts, cortisol is great. It wakes you up. It sharpens your focus. But when you are constantly grinding without recovery, cortisol just pools in your system. And it actively impairs the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain responsible for memory and learning.
Oh, wow. So you're literally hurting your ability to learn.
Yes. So by skipping sleep or skipping a walk to stare at a textbook for an extra 3 hours, you are biologically degrading your ability to retain the information you are reading.
So well-being actually dictates academic performance. They aren't in competition. They're the exact same system. Let's unpack the specific practical ways the material suggests maintaining this engine, because they sound simple, but they're usually the first things we abandon under pressure.
They really are. The foundational step is talking openly with trusted adults or friends, which directly attacks that isolation we just talked about.
Right. Getting it out of your own head.
Exactly. Then there's deliberately allowing time for rest and recovery, engaging in physical activity, developing balanced routines, and finally, actively avoiding excessive comparison with others.
I want to zoom in on that idea of rest and recovery for a second, because in these hyper-competitive environments, any time not spent producing feels like a moral failure.
Yeah.
Like staring at the ceiling feels like laziness.
It is anything but lazy. When you step away from active, focused work, say, you go for a walk without listening to anything, or you just sit quietly. Your brain activates what's called the default mode network.
The default mode network.
Yes. This is the neurological state where your brain actually consolidates memories, forms abstract connections, and essentially saves the information you've been studying.
So stepping away to rest isn't abandoning the work. It's literally hitting the save button on the document.
That's a great way to frame it.
If you don't do it, the hours you just spent studying might just vanish.
Exactly. And the physical activity piece is equally mechanical. Exercise is one of the only reliable ways to flush that pooled cortisol out of your bloodstream, resetting your baseline stress levels.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And what about that last point? Avoiding excessive comparison. That feels like the silent killer, especially when you live in a dorm where you can literally see the light on under your rival's door at 3 a.m.
Comparison is a massive cognitive drain. Your brain only has so much bandwidth. Every ounce of mental energy you spend tracking someone else's perceived progress is energy stolen from your own learning process.
So we maintain the engine through these routines. And according to the analysis, this is what allows you to develop long-term persistence. Dame Kelly Holmes' achievements weren't overnight miracles. They were the result of sustained effort over years, despite massive disappointments.
Exactly. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
But I have to ask, how does someone actually build that kind of persistence? I mean, I imagine that just means forcing yourself to stare at the textbook till you break through the wall, white-knuckling your way through the pain.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's actually the exact opposite. Brute forcing your way through, relying on sheer willpower that is a guaranteed recipe for burnout.
Really? So what's the alternative?
The framework for persistence here is much more strategic. It means continuing to prepare even when your motivation is completely depleted. It's about relying on microscopic routines when the inspiration simply isn't there.
Give me an example of what that looks like in practice.
Think about an elite athlete on a freezing, rainy Tuesday morning. They don't wake up bursting with joy and motivation to go run in the mud.
Definitely not.
On the days the motivation is zero, they don't negotiate with themselves. They just execute the smallest possible routine, putting their running shoes on. That's it. For a student, it means not waiting to feel inspired to write an essay. It means opening the laptop and typing one single sentence, regardless of how you feel.
The routine carries you when the motivation drops.
And there's a profound paradox here. We think we need confidence to take action. But the psychology shows that confidence grows gradually through repeated effort. The effort comes first. The confidence is the byproduct.
Wow.
It is built in the dark when nobody is watching, simply because you decided to do the reading or run the laps anyway.
Okay, so that covers the long-term grind. We maintain the engine with well-being, and we build persistence through consistent, unglamorous micro-routines. But let's escalate things. What happens in the crucible moments?
You mean the moments of acute, immediate pressure?
Right. Because having a balanced routine is great on a random Thursday in October. But what about the Olympic final? Or for our listener, what about the morning of a life-altering assessment? Or the 5 minutes before you step on stage for a major keynote?
Those are the make-or-break moments, yeah.
The analysis notes that elite athletes learn to focus on preparation and mental discipline rather than the fear of outcomes. But how do you actually shut off that fear of the outcome when the result actually does matter for your future? If I'm standing outside an exam hall, my hands are shaking, my heart is hammering against my ribs, you can't just tell me to magically stop caring about a grade that dictates my university options.
No, you can't.
My body is in full-blown panic mode.
And that is a completely valid challenge. You cannot simply instruct your brain to stop caring about the future. But what you can do, and what the psychological framework details, is a specific cognitive pivot. Preparation helps transform anxiety into constructive focus.
Transform anxiety, not eliminate it.
Exactly. This is where human biology is endlessly fascinating. If I hooked you up to a biometric monitor when you are terrified outside that exam room, and then I hooked you up to the exact same monitor when you're standing at the starting line of a race you are genuinely thrilled to run, the readouts would be virtually identical.
Wait, really?
Oh, wait.
Identical?
Yes. Your heart rate is elevated. Adrenaline is flooding your bloodstream. Your pupils are dilated to take in more information. Your body is mobilizing enormous resources for immediate, intense action.
So the physical hardware is doing the exact same thing whether I'm terrified or excited?
Yes. The hardware is just supplying raw energy. It's your software, your prefrontal cortex, that slaps a label on that physical state.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
If you are focusing on the uncontrollable, massive future, like failing the test or ruining your career, your brain labels that energy anxiety. It feels overwhelming. But if you shift where you point that energy...
It's basically a rebranding exercise for your nervous system.
Essentially, yes. You apply this by breaking massive tasks into deeply manageable steps. You practice calming breathing techniques to regulate the heart rate. You redirect all that raw nervous energy away from the massive uncontrollable outcome, and you pour it entirely into controllable present actions.
So instead of panicking about the final grade.
Right. I can't control what questions will be on the final exam, but I can control breaking this one single chapter into 3 bullet points right now.
You are shrinking the world down.
Precisely. By zeroing in on the micro steps, the existential dread loses its grip. You give your highly energized brain a very specific, immediate task to execute.
I love that. You take it from a sweeping existential crisis down to a practical checklist. But let's zoom out for a second, because up until now, we've focused heavily on the internal landscape of the individual mind. You know, the lone wolf hacking their own brain, regulating their own heart rate. But boarders, just like Olympic athletes who train in squads and camps, they don't live in a vacuum.
No, they live in a highly contagious collective environment.
Exactly. The moment a student steps out of their dorm room, they absorb the collective panic of the 50 other kids in their hall. The analysis dedicates a significant amount of space to how the community ecosystem functions and how supporting others strengthens the whole structure.
Because boarding houses, much like tight-knit corporate teams, are unique ecosystems of emotional contagion. Humans have mirror neurons. We biologically catch the stress or the calm of the people around us.
We just absorb it.
Exactly. The analysis explicitly states that resilience grows exponentially when communities actively encourage empathy and shared encouragement.
So what does this all mean? We usually romanticize resilience as this incredibly solo, grit-your-teeth endeavor. You know, the lone rock climber scaling a cliff entirely alone, battling the elements. But based on the psychology, It's not a solo rock climber scaling a cliff alone. It's a climbing team where everyone is checking each other's ropes and finding the footholds together.
This raises an important question, though. It reframes empathy entirely. We tend to think of community support as just being nice, a soft skill. But in high-pressure environments, it is actually a hard survival mechanism.
How so? Walk me through the mechanics of that.
Well, look at the positive contributions that build a healthy boarding culture. Celebrating peers' achievements without jealousy, offering genuine reassurance during difficult periods, actively shutting down negative comparison or toxic gossip.
Which can be hard to do in the moment.
It is, but it's crucial. Building inclusive friendships that don't rely on tearing others down. When you do these things, you aren't just performing an act of charity for someone else. Strong communities help individuals feel safe enough to take risks.
Meaning, if I help build an environment that doesn't punish failure, I get to live in an environment that won't punish me when I inevitably fail.
That is the core of reciprocal resilience.
Right.
If you create a hypercritical shark tank, you have to swim in it.
Oof.
And in a shark tank, no one feels safe enough to try a new study method or ask a stupid question in class or admit they are struggling. Growth just stops. But by actively avoiding negative criticism and celebrating others, you are weaving the psychological safety net that you yourself will require when you face your own setbacks. The community ecosystem dictates the absolute ceiling of the individual's resilience.
That completely flips the idea of competition on its head. Helping your peers doesn't diminish your slice of the pie. It expands the psychological safety required for everyone to perform at their absolute peak. It's like the ultimate performance enhancer.
Exactly. A supportive environment yields higher individual metrics every time.
So let's bring this all back to you listening to this right now. Why does an analysis about boarding school teenagers and a retired Olympic runner matter for your life today? Whether you're commuting to a corporate job, running a household, or trying to pivot careers.
Because the underlying architecture of human performance doesn't change based on your age, your tax bracket, or your profession.
Exactly. The core skills we've unpacked today, managing massive cognitive challenges by shrinking the world down, building inclusive friendships that act as safety nets, maintaining motivation through micro-routines rather than waiting for inspiration, and treating physical well-being as the prerequisite for mental output. These are the exact tools that prepare us for every transition in life. Resilience isn't a phase you just age out of.
You never age out of it. You just graduate to more complex, higher stakes challenges.
So if there's one ultimate thesis to take away from this entire deep dive, let it be this. You do not need to feel confident every day. Let that truly sink in. Growth actively happens in those deeply uncomfortable, nausea-inducing moments of uncertainty. Dame Kelly Holmes' journey proves that it is perseverance, emotional honesty, and a stubborn reliance on gradual improvement that actually lead to meaningful achievement.
It is never about fearless perfection. It is simply about having the willingness to take the next incredibly small step, even when your hands are shaking.
Exactly. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building off our conversation about the ecosystems we live in. We established that strong communities make us feel safe enough to keep trying. So take a hard look at the professional or personal circles you inhabit right now.
The teens you manage, the groups you socialize with, the culture of your own household.
Are the groups you are a part of acting as high-stress pressure cookers that demand instant performative perfection? Or have you actively helped build a community safety net that gives everyone around you the freedom to fail, recover, and try again? Because remember, that VIP path of constant confidence doesn't actually exist. We're all just trying to navigate the murky waters, and it's a hell of a lot easier when we are checking each other's ropes. Take care, and we'll catch you in the next deep dive.